Tonight, I'll be sharing some thoughts with you from the edges of White Wood about why edge-dwelling and Jewish dissent are potentially connected. Reading the book of Ruth for this Shavuot, I was reminded again that Ruth is a figure who resides on multiple edges simultaneously, making her the ultimate catalyst for change. She doesn't just sit on the border, though. She is herself the embodied intersection of several precarious boundaries, which include religion, class, and sex. And in inhabiting these intersections, these edges, the biblical Ruth brings a particular dissenting perspective to her new community. And so it's this positionality on the edges that I'd like to briefly explore with you, not actually as it happens via the book of Ruth, although inspired by it, but rather through another radical Jewish text, Felix Salten's book, Bambi, the story of a life in a forest. There are two versions of Bambi, both are great. There's the popular Disney adaptation, which many of us grew up with, a coming-of-age tale with an environmental message. And then there's the 1923 original, a dark and existential allegory of Jewish suffering that was actually banned by the Nazis in the late 1920s. But the idea of Jewish edge-dwelling and dissent can, interestingly, I think, be found in both versions, despite Disney's softer and more romantic take on the story. To help us think about the tropes of dissent and edge-dwelling then, I'm going to share two passages from the Bambi story. The first illustrates edge-dwelling and what it means to see from the periphery. And the second illustrates how the edge-dweller, although seeing, has the right to remain unseen. Both stances work as forms of Jewish dissent. So the first passage comes from the first half of the book. And the scene that I want to draw your attention to is the one where Bambi is warned by his mother about the dangers of the open spaces that lie beyond the woodlands. As they reach the edge of the forest and look out onto the meadow, Bambi's mother stops him abruptly so that she can explain that the meadow is not as safe as it might first appear. She instructs him then to wait at the edge of the forest, to be attentive and alert, to look carefully into the empty space of the meadow where everything can be seen so clearly, where everything is visible to all. And until he understands this, he should not venture into it. The first text then. It's not easy to walk onto the meadow, his mother said. It's a difficult and dangerous matter. Don't ask why. You'll learn about this later. For now, you are to obey exactly what I tell you. Will you do as I say? Yes, Bambi promised. Good. Now I'm going to enter the meadow first, all by myself. Stay here and wait. And keep your eyes on me at all time. Now his mother trotted onto the meadow. Bambi did not take his eyes off her and watched as she moved forward. He stood there, full of expectation, full of fear and curiosity. In the Bambi book, the meadow, we are told then, can look peaceful but still harbour threat. Bambi must do more than simply see from the edges. His looking must be more than a glance. It must be a deep reading of the landscape. Being attentive at the edge, Bambi learns that reality is layered, that safety is often an illusion, and that danger, although sometimes obvious, often remains unseen. By lingering at the edge, Bambi's marginal perspective helps him to look strategically. This is an intellectualized form of seeing where intelligence and instinct combine. Watching from the edges, the periphery provides a panoptic view, and Bambi learns that he can see the entire theatre of the meadow, what is there and what is not. In the second passage, from the second half of the book, we find the old prince, Bambi's father, taking a wounded Bambi deep into the forest, guiding him so that he may remain unseen by the hunter. They journey into the woods, crossing significant ground, circling and moving through dense, secluded areas, following untrodden paths, to stay hidden from the gaze of man. With the help of the old prince, Bambi makes himself illegible, present to the forest, but unmappable, undetectable to the hunter. The lesson that Bambi learns is that his power lies in being ungraspable, in being unseen. The second text. The old prince made a wide circle. It took a long time. Despite the veil of pain and weakness, Bambi was amazed to see that they were walking past the great oak again. The old prince stopped and sniffed the ground. "He's still here," he whispered. "It's him, and that's his dog. Come along, faster." They ran, but suddenly the old prince stopped again, moving ahead slowly, sniffing. "Aha!" the old prince exclaimed and seemed almost joyful. "We're behind them now." He continued for a while on the same path. Then he unexpectedly doubled around and began to make a new circle. They came to the old oak tree again, but on the opposite side. Bambi staggered after him. Then the old prince took yet another direction. They kept walking for a long time until he said, "Finally!" And they came to a halt before a patch of small oak and dogwood trees. And there was an enormous hollow trunk of beech tree, thickly embedded in the bushes, which closed tightly from the top whenever anyone entered, so that it was impossible to be seen by anyone. In this scene, Bambi avoids moving along known, remembered routes in the forest, instead moving in circles and on untrodden paths. Bambi's strategy is to unmap himself from the hunter, whose power lies in being able to predict movement. By treading on the trails that are rarely used, however, Bambi becomes unpredictable and untrackable. This is a deliberate strategy of imperceptibility. In this refusal to do what is expected by not following the traditional ways, he dissents, rendering himself illegible to those who think that they can read and predict his thoughts and movements. Both the first and second passages, then, from Felix Salten's Tale of the Young Deer, Bambi can be reimagined as a tactical narrative focused on what it means to see from the edge, but also how remaining unseen within the forest represents a strategic and dissenting withdrawal from the sunlit centre and the familiar ways of the wood. In the first passage, Bambi learns what it means to see from the edges, aware that with the transparency of the sunlit meadow comes danger. To see from the edges, then, is to move from immersion to perspective. Edge vision doesn't focus on what is apparent, but on what is missing, or on what is out of place. Like Bambi, those on the edges see the interruptions in the landscape, rather than the landscape itself. Seeing from the edges means that you stop looking at what's happening and start looking at why and how it's happening. Watching from the edges, remaining on the periphery, you see what the centre cannot or does not want to see. This stance of staying and watching from the peripheries is an anomaly that power finds difficult to understand. Because in a society that equates participation with hyper-visibility and transparency, watching and waiting on the opaque edges, becomes a refusal to conform to this demand. It's dissent, strategic withdrawal from the incessant feedback loop of being shaped by how we imagine others perceive us or being captured in those perceptions. And then, in the second passage, to avoid the hunter's gaze, Bambi learned how to make himself unseen, moving unpredictably, not on the old, worn paths, but by forging new and dissenting ways, circular rather than linear. For those comfortable in the centre, the old paths are equated with belonging and safety. But from the edges you understand that these old, predictable ways lead all too easily to being captured by power, obliterated by conformity, rendered as same as by the status quo. The known paths keep you within boundaries of what is familiar, comfortable and acceptable. But the untrodden paths lead not only to new ways, but to remaining irreducible to those who would capture you, know you, and absorb or assimilate you into their agenda. In the Bambi story, opacity is literalized through the dense brush of the forest. By dwelling in the impenetrable wood, Bambi asserts the right to live without being seen, measured, or understood by the dominant power. Not being observed, then, is a refusal to be defined or managed. And this absence becomes a form of dissent. By refusing to recognize and be recognized within the existing system, you deny the status quo its authority, breaking the consensus that the center is the only space of power and influence. Bambi is not hiding, although hidden. He is refusing to be grasped by either the hunter's logic or the logic of the many. His is a refusal to be made legible to a system that carelessly obliterates. In Bambi, A Life in a Forest, the young deer becomes the outsider, the unseen edge-dweller, who, despite his distancing himself, nevertheless belongs. It is Bambi who provides his community with something it cannot provide for itself, a perspective unclouded by the group's internal biases or paralyzing traditions. By seeing from the edges, Bambi becomes the bridge between what the community is and what it needs to be. In this sense, Bambi is a dissenter situated within the community, but choosing to occupy its most precarious internal boundary. Being on this inside edge means that Bambi occupies a permanent state of resistance to the status quo. But this isn't simple dissension. Rather, it's a radical and complex expression of what it means to redefine one's presence, to exist within a group, whilst remaining uncaptured by its normativities and dogmas. This right to opacity is a powerful form of dissent, then. It's a refusal to be seen, to be made apparent, rendered known and therefore safe to the group. But the periphery is also the source of the radical perspective, a perspective that, despite its reluctance, the centre needs. Because positioned on the precarious thresholds of the world, it is the dissenting edge-dweller who most clearly sees what is coming.